Hello and welcome to Inside Tennessee Football's practice facility. I'm Ryan Sylvia, joined by Noah Taylor. We're with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network, and it is early signing day here on December 20th. So we just spoke with head coach Josh Heupel, and he kind of gave the rundown of the entire class. Before we get into our thoughts on some specific guys and what Heupel had to say kind of about the world of college football a little bit with the transfer portal and everything that's been going into that, I want to give you guys a look at kind of by the numbers what this class looks like. 1 5-star on Rivals.com and Mike Matthews, 13 4-stars, 7 3-stars, and 2 unranked guys. That includes the long snapper that committed today as well. You also toss in 4 transfers, and that gives you a total of 27 guys. 4 transfers, 10 in-state guys are committed, including 2 of those guys being transfers. So Tennessee kind of locking down the border a little bit. Josh Heupel talked about how that's important as well. 18 early enrollees, 14 of them in high school right now, or not anymore, I guess, but 14 high school recruits, and then 4 of them out of the transfer portal. Really quickly, those early enrollees include 5-star Mike Matthews, and then 4-stars Max Anderson, Caleb Beasley, Boo Carter, Gage Ginther, Peyton Lewis, Kellen Lindstrom, Jake Merklinger, William Satterwhite, Edwin Spillman, and Braylon Staley. 3-stars Edris Farouk, Marcus Gorey Jr., and Jesse Perry, and then the 4 transfers round out the rest of that group. So a really solid class for Tennessee as Josh Heupel was able to piece it together. No one went unsigned as well, which is a big deal. So no loose ends that need to be tied up as you move forward. Of course, you're still going to be looking for transfer guys, still looking for maybe some guys who didn't sign today at other programs, but guys that have verbally committed to Tennessee have officially signed. Let's jump into our thoughts, though. We'll start with you, Noah. What was your biggest takeaway from what Heupel had to say today?
Yeah, I think one is pretty undramatic signing day, which is good, like you mentioned there. As a coaching staff, I'm sure you love that. No loose ends. I think you kind of summed it up well there. Some of the things that kind of stuck out to me was kind of the late addition last night with Cole Harrison in that tight end room. A room that Tennessee obviously wanted to add to. They were really intentional when the transfer portal opened, offering Jolly from UConn, getting Holden Stays on campus for a visit, and then ultimately getting his commitment. Heupel said today, he's, as you mentioned, one of those early enrollees. He's here on campus now, going through bowl practices, which helps a lot. Guy that has a lot of experience. But you lost, one of your commitments, your tight end commitments earlier this month. But you make up for it with Cole Harrison, and Heupel was very complimentary about him. A guy he said that had some length, had some athleticism. We heard that a lot today about those guys that they've signed. Obviously, they have those attributes because that's why they're here. But a guy that I thought was interesting that he said that those things can develop a lot. A guy that I think is going to be dynamic, going to be able to give you some things. Obviously, going to have to beef up a little bit, but he's going to have some time because you do obviously lose McCollin Castles and Jacob Bourne, but Ethan Davis is going to be back next season after a year under his belt in the system. But I thought it was interesting that they add him late and then obviously get him to sign today, and Heupel complimentary of what he's going to bring to the table.
Because you also lost Jonathan Eccles, the 4-star tight end, over to Alex Golish at USF. So there was a moment there where it was like, what is this tight end room going to look like? You just had Ethan Davis, and then kind of at the snap of a finger, you get Holden Stays and now Cole Harrison out of the high school ranks. And you feel a little bit better about that spot. He kind of was asked, are you comfortable with the guys you have in that room right now, or do you want to keep getting more guys? And he didn't really give a straight answer, kind of said, of course, we're going to keep evaluating. So I don't think he thinks they need another body in that tight end room necessarily, but if he finds a tight end that he thinks fits well and wants to come here, I don't think he would shy away from that. I want to talk about the quarterback position, though. Obviously, Nico Imaliava is your quarterback 1 heading into next season. He'll be a redshirt freshman. Now you bring in 4-star Jake Merklinger to be the backup. We'll have to see what Gaston Moore wants to do. He has eligibility, but went through the senior day festivities. So does he want to transfer somewhere else to play? Is he done with football? A lot of questions for a guy like that to see exactly what he wants to do. But Heupel was pretty complimentary of Jake Merklinger. And to me, I think it speaks a lot to someone that's coming into a situation where you have Nico and the quarterback room seems kind of locked up for the time being, for the foreseeable future, where let's say Nico leaves after, let's say he's as good as he's advertised to be and leaves after 2 years. Well, now Jake Merklinger is in his 3rd season before he's able to touch the football as a starter, unless there's an injury. It's a tough situation to come into. I think it speaks a lot to him that he feels confident enough in himself to come here and to think that he can make an impact on this team. And Heupel talked about how he thought he has a lot of potential and said there's some things that we're already tweaking with him because he's on campus right now in his form and kind of stuff like that, but he sees a lot of potential in him. So what are your kind of overall thoughts about the quarterback room right now?
Yeah, like you said, and Heupel mentioned this as well, it's hard to keep guys in the quarterback room these days. You don't kind of have the luxury of adding depth like you used to out of the transfer portal, or getting guys in that have some experience. You kind of maybe some holdovers. I think Gaston Moore's kind of been that guy since he's arrived that, not somebody you're going to count on leading you a lot, but you feel pretty comfortable with him being that third string guy. And now with being uncertain of what he's going to do here, what his future is going to be like, Heupel was asked about what, do you go look for a guy that has some experience to come in and kind of be that guy, or do you feel comfortable with Nico taking over and then having a freshman, Jake Merlinger,
Merlinger,
being the guy behind him? Heupel asked about it and said they're always evaluating that, something they look at. Kind of the political answer you kind of expect that out of him. But it'll be interesting to see here because you're obviously in bowl prep right now. You've wrapped up signing day. I thought what was interesting too is how they talked about. He mentioned Keenan Peely and Omar Norman-Lott, big additions that you got after your bowl game last year. So still a lot of time here for Tennessee after the bowl game and before signing day in February to maybe add some guys too, and maybe quarterback would be one of those.
Maybe one of the funnier parts of the press conference when he was asked, hey, does having a guy like Nico who's so young and is projected to be this starter and it's going to be tough for him to lose that job, does that make it tough to land a veteran guy to come and be the backup? And you're just kind of like, yeah. I mean, yes, it does. So that was kind of a funny thing that he talked about as well. I want to touch on 3 playmakers, though, 3 guys that could be seeing the checkerboards a lot in their career here. 5-star receiver Mike Matthews, 4-star athlete Boo Carter, and 4-star running back Peyton Lewis. I want to start with Mike Matthews, kind of the cream of the crop here, the guy that's headlining the class. Heupel had a lot of good things to say about him. You mentioned the long and fast and kind of all those adjectives that he used a lot. Those were 3 guys that he mentioned that with. And he says that Mike Matthews is a guy that they kind of already can see the potential out on the practice field. All 3 of those guys early and early, so they've had a chance to see what they've been able to do. And those have been guys that have stepped up and played kind of impressed early since they've been here. Boo Carter, thing of note for him, he talked about how they've already kind of tested him as a punt returner and that they've already been really impressed with him. We'll have to see exactly where they want to use him. Will it be at wide receiver? Will it be a defensive back? You got to get the ball in his hands somehow, it seems like, with how dynamic of an athlete he is. So maybe he goes to the defensive back spot, which a lot of people are starting to talk about probably suits this team the best because of their need there.
Right.
But you're still going to be able to get him the ball in punt returns with D. Williams moving on. So I think that's a big deal if they're able to do that. And then Peyton Lewis, track star speed. He's a really fast guy, and we've seen Heupel use some of these younger backs so far. Jalen Wright, when he was a young guy back in 21, he got reps. He got a lot of touches. Dylan Sampson last year as a freshman, he got a lot of touches. So I don't think they're going to shy away from that. Of course, right now you project maybe a Dylan Sampson, Cam Seldon duo in your running back room, but there's going to be room for Peyton Lewis to, I think, get some touches and start to do a lot of things this year. Let's talk about the transfers, though, now. In the defensive back, in the secondary, you have Jacoby Thompson and you have Jermod McCoy. What are your thoughts on kind of the state of that defensive back room with those additions and then maybe some of those freshmen possibly getting a chance with how thin that group is?
Yeah, Heupel talked about that as well today and just kind of feeling good about where that group is. And I think that was kind of the first question to him. Everybody kind of wanted to know. And keep in mind, this is the first time we've talked to him since the Vanderbilt game. So, yeah, I mean, a lot has happened since the end of the season there. You have lost some guys, some starters in that room. You bring in some, like you mentioned, through the portal, some new guys as well. But these next few weeks are going to be super important, not just for the guys that are on the team already, or that will be eligible to play against Iowa because they're going to get a lot of reps in that game. But some of these young guys too, getting these bowl reps, it's like essentially, an extra spring football for them. So you would imagine by the spring it's going to help them out a lot too. But he seemed pretty comfortable with where that room is, and kind of expected some of those guys to leave. Nothing that and we kind of thought that as well. Nobody that jumped off the page that looked like a major loss for them, but critical few weeks ahead for that whole group.
Yeah, and I think it is something that's important to note that Heupel said back in the day when he was a player, no one opted out of bowl games.
Right.
That was a moment for the veterans and the seniors and stuff to play. Nowadays, you have a lot of these guys opt out, and you have a lot of these guys already in the portal who aren't going to be on the team for that game. And so it really is don't know if tryout's the right word, but it's an opportunity for a lot of these young guys like a Ricky Gibson, a Jordan Matthews, for them to show off what they can do, because they're going to have to play a lot of minutes or a lot of snaps in this game. So that's something that I think is important to look out for, is to kind of see how these young guys do. I think that'll be something to know going forward. Let's touch on the offensive line too. You bring in 4 guys, 3 4-stars, 1 3-star. Not a lot of playtime opportunities at the offensive line spot early with everyone that's coming back, and then just kind of the position group in general. It's not really one that you see guys step immediately into a role. Kind of, what are your thoughts on the guys that Heupel was able to bring in, and kind of just the state of the offensive line room right now, with at least 3 confirmed returners? We're waiting on Javonte Spraggins' decision, but there's been murmurs about him kind of leaning towards a return due to his injury as well.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned. I mean, that room's in a really good spot. I think that's going to help these 4 guys that you bring in. I believe all of them are on. All 4 are going through, bowl prep right now, which is huge. Bennett Warren's one that obviously jumps off the page, given his size.
Literally,
you talk about, not being able to. And Heupel said it as well. It's hard to get a guy that probably that position of all you have to develop the most. It's hard to get a guy. A Boo Carter or Mike Matthews can come in and make plays immediately. They may not do it consistently, but they can do it. A little bit harder for the line. I think it's going to help tremendously that you get it right now. Like you mentioned, we have at least 3 of those guys back in Cooper Mays, and we're still waiting on Javonte Spraggins. But I think it's going to be valuable for them to kind of have some time to develop behind those guys. But yeah, Bennett Warren's kind of one of those that you think will be a little bit further ahead than those guys.
All right. If you are listening, you might not have noticed the difference, but if you're watching, you definitely did. Different locations for us right now. We ran into a little bit of technical difficulties over at the practice facility, so we're back to our normal VolReport Show setup here, kind of the remote action. But it's going to be the same show. We're going to pick up right where we left off. We just finished talking about the offensive line. Noah, next I want to ask you about the defensive line. Tennessee brings in a couple edge rushers, but doesn't really get a defensive tackle in this group. Of course, the portal is still open to add guys in that respect, and then you have guys returning like Amari Thomas to fill that role. But overall, what are your thoughts on what the defensive line looks like for this upcoming year, and then in the future as these incoming freshmen kind of get some experience under their belt?
Yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about with the offensive line. You're in pretty good shape there with who you return. Obviously, you lose Tyler Barron to the portal, but a guy you mentioned is huge having back in Omari Thomas. James Pierce Jr. off the edge, who had an incredible season for Tennessee. Can only expect that he's only going to get better. But yeah, I think you look at this group, they did pretty well there. I think the headliner is Jordan Ross, a guy who kind of stuck with his commitment for a long time with Tennessee. It was huge getting him to sign today. Had a lot of really, really good offers there, and a big pickup for Tennessee out of Birmingham. So, you've seen a lot of success in Rodney Gardner's unit off the edge. When you go back and you look at what Byron Young was able to do last year, you go back and again, what James Pierce was able to do. Tyler Barron, I know he's gone, but took a huge leap this year. And you got some other young pieces that'll have to step up next season that are currently already on the team, have been here for a few years. When you think of guys like Tyree West, I think that the group's in overall pretty good shape. And like you mentioned, the transfer portal, I think, will be big here before the bowl and even after the bowl. They made some defensive line moves last year after the bowl game. So you would have to guess that they'll probably bring in a tackle out of there too.
You mentioned Jordan Ross, so I agree. I think that he is a stud. He could be really good for this team. You look at some of the other guys, though. You have a 4-star in Kellen Lindstrom. You have 3-star Jeremiah Hurd. You have 3-star Carson Gentle, an in-state kid who was the first kid to commit in this class and stuck all the way through, which is always a pretty cool thing to see. So I think you have a good group of edge rushers. My issue is maybe the lack of depth at defensive tackle. You have a lot of veterans there, but you're going to have to start maybe looking towards the future in that regard. And you also have to toss in Jamal Wallace as well, another edge rusher. But the JUCO commit, if you watch his film, you can tell he's not afraid of contact. He'll light anyone up that kind of steps in his way. So they have some guys to help kind of rotate in, but we'll have to see what exactly that looks like. But with Amari Thomas coming back, Norman Lott hasn't made a decision yet, but looks like he's trending on coming back as well. You feel pretty good, I think, about where you stand in that regard. But as we've said with some of these decisions, like an Omar Norman Lott, Jabari Small, another name that's been floating around where you're kind of waiting to see what exactly they're going to do. Javonte Spraggins, we talked about him earlier. Josh Heupel said the majority of guys he feels are pretty set, but he didn't rule out that there might be some more changes ahead of the bowl game or even after the bowl game in that window where guys are able to enter the portal, and then also guys coming in as well for next year. So kind of what are your thoughts on his comments that he had about this roster heading into this bowl game and then heading into next year about where it stands and kind of how firm it is?
Yeah, you mentioned it there. I thought that wording was very interesting. The majority of those guys, and kind of obviously without saying it, kind of hinted at the possibility that there's still some decisions out there that'll be made here pretty soon, because now we're, I guess, 2 weeks away, less than 2 weeks from that game kicking off. And you're getting a better idea of what this team will look like. Obviously, some names that jump out, like you said there, Jabari Small being one. What's he going to do? What's that running back room going to look like? You already have Jalen Wright declared for the draft, opting out of that game. And it's kind of the situation now with the portal too is you can't miss a certain window. There's a lot of talent in there. And I think that's obviously got to play a factor here for guys that are maybe not, wanting to get in there and find a place, find a home for themselves before bowl games are over. So it'll be an interesting couple of weeks. I think the roster as a whole, though, is in pretty good shape, all things considered. They've dealt with a lot of injuries this year. You've had a lot of young guys that have had to step up and play at different points in the season. And then, of course, you get a lot of those veterans who've already made that decision. We've talked about Amari Thomas. We've talked about Cooper Mays. That's massive. You're going to have those guys available as well because they've made up their minds. They're coming back. They're definitely playing in this bowl game. But I think the fact that you've had to turn to a lot of young guys, particularly in that secondary, which right now has a lot of guys who will not be there because they've transferred already. I think that experience is going to be valuable. So I think the roster overall should, we all have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like when that game kicks off on New Year's Day, I think.
And just as there's some guys on Tennessee that might play in this bowl game and then afterwards hit the portal, there's guys leading up to the Citrus Bowl because it's one of the final bowls that they're going to play in their bowl game and then they're going to hit the portal. And so Tennessee is going to have to look kind of both ways with that. And I thought the majority, the wording there, like you said, was really interesting because it's not ruling out that anyone that this is it, but it is a good sign that he feels pretty confident that a good amount of these guys are pretty locked in for the bowl game and then maybe the year after as well. Before we get out of here, though, like you said, we're nearing this bowl game. It's coming up really fast. Do you have an updated prediction? Do you still think Tennessee wins? How do you see this one going?
Yeah, I still feel pretty good about it. It's Iowa. It's a good football team. It's a 10-win football team. It was the runner-up in the Big Ten. They play a certain style of football to where you might beat them, but there's really no pretty way to do it. You can't really win pretty against them or lose pretty against them either, if that's even a thing. So I do think I do hold to that it's going to be a probably pretty ugly football game, very low scoring. I don't think, Tennessee's offense is going to make some drastic change from what it was this year over the last month. So I do expect to be low scoring, but I still like Tennessee to come out on top in this game. I think, like we've said before, they've got enough playmakers to where, it's a really good Iowa defense nationally in the Big Ten. It's really good. It's going to be a test running the football especially, but I do think there's enough playmakers out there to where you see a game kind of similar to that Texas A&M game, but you're going to hit on a couple big plays, and maybe you get a D. Williams break one, for a touchdown and flip the game for you that way as well. So I think they have enough weapons to win in an ugly game. And like we mentioned, I think those young guys, the last month and really this season as a whole, having to kind of be thrust into bigger roles is going to help them a lot too by the time this game kicks off.
You mentioned it's going to be tough to run. You know what makes that harder? Jalen Wright not playing in the bowl game. Your leading rusher isn't there. And then Javonte Spraggins, he's still recovering from injury as well. So there's another offensive lineman that's down and won't be able to compete. So it's not going to make things easy for them against a stout Iowa defense anyway. But if you look at the other end of things, Tennessee maybe catches a break a little bit with the secondary that already has a lot of guys gone. You're now looking at an Iowa offense who hasn't played very well this year, to say the least. So maybe you catch a break on that side of the ball, though. While your offense is going to have a really tough time scoring, your defense maybe isn't going up against a 10-win caliber offense like you think one would be. Instead, it's the defense that's carried this Iowa team. So I agree. I think it'll be ugly. I think Tennessee wins by a possession or two. I don't think it gets to be anything crazy. But I will take the Vols to win this game in Orlando. But we'll be in Orlando. We're going to make the trip down for this bowl game. So make sure you head over to VolReport.com to get all of our content leading up to that game. Men's basketball has a game tomorrow against Tarleton State. So make sure you catch up with the top 10 Vols in that. And then the Lady Vols struggling to start this season, but Rakia Jackson is back, All-American caliber player. So maybe the Lady Vols can get something going here with one more game until SEC play starts for them. So head over to VolReport.com for all of our content there. Links to everything you need is in the description. And thank you for watching.